Ladies and gentlemen, we have Liftoff. It's Crow's Nest number 12, by the way. How you doing, Veek? Welcome.
By the way,
By the way.
welcome.
Dude, you know what?
It's been pretty epic.
It's been pretty epic. It's also been a little bit since our last show. I just have to point out that
Yeah,
you recently nerfed Dad, because for those who don't know, on our Discord
yeah,
server, which you should definitely join if you're listening to this,
of
we have an
course.
automated bot called Deputy Dad, and he kind of runs the show over there. And what he does, among other things, is he makes sure to keep reactions at 3 or 7 if it is within his
Yeah, I
power.
wonder if I can code the bot to actually respond a comment to this video and just like spam us with by the way for every 12 that we said.
Ah,
Obviously, very
yeah,
important to code that
yeah.
because that's very essential to our journey.
It is, yeah, and there's the best part about the community for my money is, well, at least one of the really best parts about it, because there are actual best parts, and this is more of like a self-aggrandizing joke. But I would say, just the fact that our sense of humor and our body of work when it comes to inside jokes is so difficult to penetrate, it actually ends up being rewarding. When you do figure things out and you finally can recontextualize all the things you heard,
Did
said,
we
and
even
read.
have
So.
depth in the humor layer?
Yes, yeah, yeah. So there's even a skill check with that. But hey,
Of
obviously the big
course.
news of this episode is the Fraud Launcher 2, and how we have a bunch of other things that
Exactly.
are
And actually,
mixing around.
even 2.1 is already coming. I'm
That's
working
right.
on that. And
Yeah,
it's pretty epic. So, shout out to Akko for helping me a bit with finding the direction I needed. I essentially rewrote it from Rust to C Sharp, and it's been very pleasant, very joyful. And yeah, it's just one click to install Cosmonarchy now, so you should have a try at it.
that's right. That's right. So before, if for those who don't know how the old style worked, essentially you had to download it's like a command line interface looking program, Fraud Launcher 1.0, and it had some text output or whatever. It wasn't very flashy or fancy by any means, and the new one is a lot closer to an actual, like, something that you might expect a GUI to provide. It is a GUI app for the first time, I think, that we've ever made something like that. Veek, is that correct? Because I mean, technically we had some
Yeah,
ambiguous and stuff in Antikythera, but that was
true.
inside the engine, so it just seems like the first
Yeah,
standalone
we never released a
program.
non-game.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So
So, yeah, and so
yeah,
with
it's pretty
that,
cool.
it is pretty
And
neat.
regarding Cosmonarchy, I think we're definitely blooming, which is really nice.
Hmm.
And I honestly was thinking about this, and I think Cosmonarchy is right now in the best state it has ever been.
Mm,
And
okay.
I had some misgivings before about like things we changed during like premonition, but I feel like right now we are better than we ever were, which is really
Right.
cool. And that just means we can improve from here. And sure, I have like some minor misgivings here and there, but it's pretty epic.
Yeah, I mean, it helps you to remember that, like, the march of progress has been positive. For those who also
Yeah.
don't maybe don't know, because I didn't like go through the whole procedure of creating custom graphics and stuff. That, like, I was thinking about this a while back when we made the
Mm.
when I dropped the Scarscape update, which is the update that we're in now. It's like eras or years of Cosmonarchy development, since it's actually been, funnily enough, 7 years of development if you date it all the way back to when it was just a
No way.
co-op project. So the last year we had Premonition launch, that was 2023, and the idea behind that, by the way, was actually supposed to be a play on the, like, sort of um, prime campaign offering that we're working on behind the scenes that hasn't really seen that much discussion, and we'll keep it under wraps for now anyway. But obviously, Veek, you know what I'm talking about, and how a premonition links to a
Mm.
dream and all that stuff. And then what's the dreaming thing in the
Mm.
Maverick icon in the middle when you go to single player? Yeah, it's all related to that. And so
I
eventually
remember
something will
someone
wake up from a
downloaded
dream.
Cosmonarchy and was wondering why he can't play single player. there's only the dreaming
Yeah, why
guy. I
am I
don't know
still
what's
dreaming?
happening.
When do I wake up? Yeah, it's pretty good. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and so, like, those separate concrete eras actually, in retrospect, have been really helpful, because you think about the Premonition update and you compare that to the Scarscape update, and we're in Scarscape right now. And I was actually thinking about, like, if this was its own thing on Steam, how I would have to create, like, all the headers and banners and
Yeah.
announcements and stuff, and how that would be actually pretty cool as, like, a way to catalog things. And so in addition to the work with the launcher, I've actually started to catalog details, not in that same sense. I didn't go back and like backdate create a back catalog era
Mm.
of news posts because it wouldn't really be appropriate because we were already past that point. But for the more modern developments, I've actually been making ModDB posts, and that's the closest thing we have currently to like the Steam news list or whatever as centralized distribution.
Right.
Eventually, we'll have to end up replace. I think like as part of ModDB's policy, you can't mark your project as released unless you have a download available, which is a little awkward because we want to have the fraud launcher to like update it. We want to update the program or whatever. But I don't mind
Yeah.
personally updating it. And every time you update a file or something, it like puts it on the front page again. So it's kind of free
But
real estate. Honestly.
imagine if we just instead of doing that, we just uploaded a TXT file with the with the URL. That'd be funny.
That would be pretty good, actually. Yeah, so maybe I can do that. Whatever,
Yeah.
you know.
You can actually join the Discord server, and you can type exclamation Cosmonarchy or CM or whatever, and
Yeah.
it will actually show you the link. And,
Right.
Oh, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a feature that was added
We
to
also
Dad just
updated
yesterday.
GPT.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, Dad's pretty cool. I like him. So
Mhm.
with Cosmonarchy in a current state that it's in, and now that we have this fraud launcher, there's some small adjustments that we want to make. Where you already mentioned that 2.1 is coming, but there's like a couple of other details that we could improve, like I think the default config for CNC draw doesn't work with OBS very nicely, and you got to kind of change it around or whatever. So that's a little bit awkward. We'll end up updating that. And then there's a couple of other things that we want to add, which is
something with the config. I think I took the Faguto's config, and I just changed one setting, and that's what's currently up.
Yeah, the setting would be adjust mouse or whatever, probably.
Yes.
Yeah, that's basically what I did, and I handed it to Sayan, who's actually been on this channel as a guest for a conversation. You guys can check that out as well if you haven't seen that for whatever reason, but it's a pretty good one about Brood War, StarCraft 2, RTS design in general, and after it's funny because after the conversation he spoke to me and said like, oh, what's your game, like where can I find out about it? And I told him, I was like, well, we're working on a launcher for it so you can actually download it easily, but here's this, because at that time we hadn't had the launcher. And then it's pretty much as soon as we got the launcher set up, he actually booted it up and played it on stream for like 4 hours, so that was really cool. And that's the kind of
just
thing when
one click.
I know, and a lot of other people who have been lurking in the server for a long time have reported in that like, hey, this is really easy for me to use now. Like Hoop Thrower, or Chumbeck as he's now known, one of our donators for a while now. He reported that like it was surprisingly easy for me to just push this button and it worked. So stuff like that is good to hear, especially from Veeq's point of view, I'm sure, because you're the one who's spent all this time trying to figure out how to work it out. And people were asking how long it took, and I thought it was funny that it was like, well, it's either 3 months or 3 days, depending on how you look at it. It's pretty good because the C# version, which is what we're using now, as opposed to the other version which you had referenced where you rewrote it from Rust, is way different now. And apparently libgit 2 actually works properly with C#, or at least more properly than it was before, right?
Yeah, the API is way more sensible, and the only caveat I found is that Neblime's installation is so broken, but it's actually not libgit, so never mind. It's something. It must be something on his end because it's the web client thing that downloads the StarCraft zip and not the Git repo. So yeah, I actually don't know.
He said that when he specified an existing installation, it worked for him. So like it just didn't try to install or download StarCraft.
Yeah, that is expected.
Yeah. So eventually, like that was the other thing to point out is that for anybody who is a returning user and maybe they had some rough go of it because they were like, oh, it's trying to download StarCraft for the first time or whatever. And like you should probably just let it do that and then delete your old installation, copy your config over or whatever. But
that's the safest way to make sure it works. You can try selecting the parent folder to the StarCraft folder if it's actually named StarCraft, and it may work. The problem is if you have any, if you don't have the exact versions we are using.
If you have any modified changes, it's like you kind of think about StarCraft. I thought Akko, who's also, like you said, shout out to him earlier for helping us out. He wrote it out in just such a very obvious manner where he said, oh, so StarCraft is just a dependency for Cosmonarchy. And thinking about it like that, it's like, we just need to download it. And so having our own clean, guaranteed, proper version of it is actually safer for us. And then you can have like a
Mm.
different version of old StarCraft if you want, or obviously remastered if you want, to run other things.
Yeah,
Because
I
there's
feel
some
like
very
most
specialty
people
uses
will
where people
have.
who are looking for modding and they're like trying to customize a
Yeah,
mod or
right.
something, I'd like work on that like separately from the Cosmonarchy one, just so you don't screw anything up, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of people, I imagine, do play remastered if they are into Brood War. So,
Yeah.
uh,
I still like
that
that
works as
Hapsea
far as I know.
uninstalled remastered on stream as he was installing Cosmonic. That was pretty good.
I
thought that
didn't
was
even know that. That's pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah. As it was well, that was back in the day, and that really shows you
I
like
see.
it's a obviously Hapsea has been around for a hot minute in our community, and it goes to show you exactly what the use case for the fraud launcher because we still had the old one, which was a command line interface, and it still required you to like put an exception into Windows Defender and all this other stuff, and like it was just not it wasn't good, it was not appropriate. It definitely
Mm.
was not like it took us like three of us in his stream chat. It was me, Mystery Me, and I figured maybe Lucy or somebody else. We're all in his stream chat. No, Roller Skates. It was all three of us in his stream chat typing away like, this is what you do, this is what you do, this you do that, and like he got it up and
Yeah.
running and he played it and he likes it, but like that was pretty ridiculous. So
Yeah.
you don't want to have to live
It's a
tech support
skill
people.
issue to
Yeah.
fucking install the best RTS ever.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So, yeah,
Thankfully, not anymore.
yeah, and with
You
that
can
obviously
instead
comes.
focus your efforts to become good at the game.
I agree with that. I agree with that. So, yeah, I just figured it's definitely good to immortalize the accomplishment and also to touch a little bit on what's going to improve. But to go back to the point I was making about the fact that like returning users might have had a bit of a rough go of it. The definite focus here, because technically the old fraud launcher still works if you have that or whatever. I just wouldn't recommend using it because it's not as easy, right? Because this one actually launches the
It's
game.
also just
So
not as robust. It will
yeah,
break more often, and it just has more problems. So
right.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, and so the reason I bring that up is just because this was clearly slated towards improving the experience for new people and for first time installation or whatever, and because it
Yeah.
does do that very well. So hats off to your work
My
week
aim
and
with
good shit.
2.1 is definitely to make it even more robust, which is nice. I also want to add more features. One thing about robustness is actually handling maps somewhat better because currently it's just like a copy paste of the release slash pre-release repo, which is kind of dirty. I would rather we actually set up a Pr0nogo set up a repo for maps already, so I'll be implementing that. And then I also want to add from features. I'd also want to add some extra links with like branding and like tech tree
Hmm.
pages. That
Hmm.
would be really nice. And yeah, I think it would be pretty epic. I think it's already pretty epic, and I was really satisfied when I heard people saying that it's that the launcher is like sweet and it just works. Yeah, because it is meant to just work. That's the point.
Yes, absolutely, and that's kind of what robustness should mean to the average person: is does it just work?
Yeah.
And honestly,
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the there's a term in general like cultural analysis, bigotry of low expectations, where you sort of are showing your true colors in a way by saying, "Oh, that person can't do that thing because like they shouldn't even be expected to do that thing." Have low expectations. And I feel like the average user, the average player of video games now has such an immensely lowered expectation for software performance and robustness and how it uses like the
Mm.
user
Yeah.
experience basically. And so to apply that lens to video games, it's just like most stuff, I mean, forget about the quality of the game itself, just like does it run? Is it performant? Is it going to crash? Like I have not had positive experiences with most video games that I've played ever, really, but especially recently. And so I think
Mm.
the fact like I don't think that should be something we celebrate. Like we made a tool that doesn't just break, that does actually just work. But we actually kind of do get to celebrate that because there's not really that attitude where that is a prized and prioritized thing
Yeah,
is
it's
not really
rare
present
nowadays.
within modern software. Yeah. So, and we have it. Hey, if for another reason to join our Discord server, we have an emoji called Modern Software, and it's a aroma virus inside a computer screen. And if that sounds appealing to you, you can hop on in. So, but
Nice.
yeah. So and again, the other reason, the actual genuine reason to join the community is if you want to interact with people who are like-minded enough to think that modern software should actually be good instead of kind of a joke. And also if you are interested in our work within the RTS genre, within other genres in the future, and of course to organize and play video games. And it's a lot easier to play those video games if they are Cosmonarchy with the new fraud launcher. So it all cycles back into
Yeah.
itself. But it's more than just it's easier to get it installed now. You said earlier, Veeq, that you think that it's in the best state that it's been. And I think that combining that with the fact that Fraud Launcher 2 has arrived, and that we get a little bit of airtime on streamers and stuff like that, we have this momentum that we've been building up. So in some ways, it's curious as to ask where
Even
we go from
Artosis
here.
now
But
knows about Cosmonarchy.
yes,
Although he didn't seem to be very happy about Protoss glassing Terran army.
I know. Yeah.
Terran base actually with the Star Sovereign. So.
Listen, I really look forward to showing him a clip later on of like infestation or sovereigns or some insane stuff that the Zerg can do, and of course have the victims be Terrans. And then when that's all done, like he'll just be like, "Wow, I guess this project is terrible for Terrans," and then I can drop like a clip where somebody's like lifting off diadems and shit, really make it obvious that Terran's actually the best race.
Yeah, I
So,
could even imagine it is like a hype trailer where the first 2 minutes are just Terran struggling, and then there's like the next 2 minutes they're just winning, and
yeah,
there's like it comes from like flying bunkers and like hurricanes and all that
yeah,
into like apostles and madcaps, and then it's like diadems
yeah,
and everything is just like crazy.
yeah.
I think Terran's probably the craziest race, honestly. It's the most difficult one, but it's also the most I bet I feel like it's the most satisfying one if you can pull it off. I
Yes.
unfortunately am not that good yet, so
Yeah.
uh
Listen, I want to see
hope
more
for
people
some point.
play Terran. I think it is unfortunate that currently the highest skill Terrans that we have right now are mega typers. They're not really
Yeah.
disproving Hapsea's rule of
We
start.
need mystery meat back.
Yes, and
He's
Artosis actually.
needed.
So we should get him in here. No, the rule that I guess you could call this Hapsea's third rule of RTS, like third law of RTS, is that Terran players are whiners, and that's we have to disprove that. And Mystery Meat actually was not a whiner, to his credit. So if he comes back, he can tell
Yeah, but
Hapsea
he
what's
had to
wrong.
switch to Protoss because he didn't want to whine. So.
Well,
The
that's true,
energy
and
was
I still
redirected.
respect that a lot more. Like if you think something is OP and you
But
think
yeah, it
that the
would
best
have
way
been
to
much more. So sorry, Shambler, for saying this, but it would have been much more based if you had actually shut up and you just like accepted being a bad Terran or whatever. Because I don't know. I
God.
know you're a typer, right? But like if you actually did that, it would be like an interesting arc to your character. Uh,
God.
and yeah, I would respect that a lot,
There you
honestly.
go. There you go. This just in: Shambler throws his keyboard out. Um, so the main thing that I think I'm thinking of here as a sort of segue into a deeper analysis of where Cosmonarchy is that we can kind of imagine talking about where we're focused on now because we have this momentum.
Mm.
What are we going to do with it? So I want to draw our attention to whether or not something that you mentioned in our DMs before we went live here with the recording is that uh, should we be focusing on campaign content now? Should we still stick with the focus of competitive play? Like that's kind of like the implicit question. And I think
Yeah.
for now we're definitely focused on both. Where I'm working on the Protoss tutorial and I'm also running the current Gauntlet and I'm planning the second Gauntlet and stuff. So for anybody who doesn't know, we actually have a sort of blossoming competitive scene, if you want to call it that, where we have fairly regular tournament stuff going on. We have these invitationals which you can
And
get
shout
invites
out
to.
to BTB for
That's right.
sponsoring our tournaments and moving things from BTA to BTB.
Got him. Absolutely got
Yeah,
him. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, his company, the pickup partner, has sponsored our tournament scene, which is pretty good, pretty big. I'm a fan of that. So, and so that means we have got prize pools, we got money for winning, we've got money for qualifying, money for doing well, and so some of our events are like 1 day events, like the invitationals. And in that situation, you just straight up, you get a certain amount of money for first place, second place, and third place in your group, and you just play a group out. And that's how it works. And usually lasts 12 hours, and they're exhausting days, but we make them happen. And then when it comes to the bigger event, the Acropolis event, as it's called now. It used to be called Ascension. We have a much more like long running scene, or like I guess phase. The first actual phase or stage of the tournament is the Gauntlet stage, and that's where you qualify into the next phase by this double elimination bracket. And we actually have two separate qualifiers this time around because of the number of spots that we need to fill and also the number of interests that we had. So we had to fill 6 slots because everybody ended up accepting their invitation back to the battlement stage, which is the second stage, and that is where you're
Yeah,
going to see the group play, the
I'll
group
be
style.
playing there.
That's right. Veeq has accepted his invite. He'll be.
Yeah.
Are you still being Zerg here? I can't remember.
I
I guess.
am, but I was fantasizing about switching to random. It's just I don't have enough time to practice Terran.
Right. Yeah. But
And Terran is definitely my weakest
yeah,
race.
you'd have to just learn Terran cheeses, and then if you get Terran, you
Dude,
just cheese.
but it's the basis race. I don't know.
So
Dude, I think I have to learn them. I've been enjoying Zerg a lot and Protoss too, but I don't know. The Terran is still appealing. I don't know.
there's definitely some things about them that are pretty exciting. I feel like if I weren't going to be a random player every single time I play the game, I might decide to focus a little bit heavily on them. Mostly because they're so maligned by the people who do play them. They think that like everything is so weak, and I'm like, well, are they just not trying it, or like what's going on here? So there's stuff for me to investigate there
Yeah.
as a developer, right? But anyway, the battlement stage is the group style, right? That's again, first, second, third place in your group. Third place is eliminated from the rest of the tournament. The first and second places move on, where second place is obviously going to be lower seed. And the final stage, the throne room stage, is what happens after battlements, and that's where you have the essentially playoffs, where that's double elimination as well. And we go to a best of 5 series all the way through until the very grand final, which is best of 7. And last event, Ascension number 7, before we changed the name to Acropolis, man, Hamster was so close to winning everything. He would have won 3 series. Well, technically, if you just count best of 5s, he did win 3 best of 5s in a row, but he could not actually win the best of 7 at the end.
Based.
So it was kind of funny how that one worked out, and unfortunate for him that he ended up not running out of steam at the very final hurdle. Like I don't know how the guy did it, but that's the
So
kind of shit that I like. So
if you have doubts about the No Frauds Club, everything here has to have an epic name, and
That's
it's
right.
just the rule. It's the law, the third law, the 12th,
12th, by the way.
12th
Yeah.
rule law, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so everything has to have an epic name, and it's pretty cool, pretty thematic.
Oh yeah,
I
we
think that's
changed all
cool.
sorts of things if you think about it from the last tournament. So we have these ideas where there's like different class players, right? Upper class, lower class. And so that's class 1, class 2, class 3. That's what we got right now. And we would have eventually that's like the equivalent of, gold, silver, bronze or something. And obviously we would add more ranks if we as we get more players, we'll end up having to
Yeah.
more bifurcate them more heavily. And at some point, I can't remember if you specifically mentioned for this one or if you were talking about maps or you're talking about the stages, but you mentioned like, oh, we should just try to rename some of this stuff. So instead of just class 1 or whatever, it's something more. So now class 1 for the rank is Sovereign after the Star Sovereign. Class 2 is Aspirant, which is actually a factional unit. And then class 3 is Hotshot, which is another factional unit. But you can imagine it's like, oh yeah, of course, I'm an Aspirant. I want to get better. And then a Hotshot is
And you
like,
get to get the icon of the unit next to your name.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So if you want that Star Sovereign icon next to your name, which probably haunts Newt now that I think about it, since he has that right next to his name, but he was glass by then.
Oh no.
So, poor guy. But maybe we could. I don't know. Maybe we could change it up somehow. I don't think we can using Discord, but it would be cool if we had like a race specific one or something. Anyway, the idea behind that for the ranking, anyway, is the idea that like, oh yeah, sure, you get access to the class 1s will get invites to these tournaments and, based on placement and whatever. And class 2s might be invited to play a qualifier match into the tournament or something, stuff like that. And so there's like a ladder, almost like a sort of a building up ladder that we're trying to figure out. And so that the names for those are different. The names for the tournament stages are different, and it's not just playoffs; it's throne room stage. It's cool. And then it's also not just like I don't even know what you would call, like, I'm trying to think of like a bad name for an update, but it's like it's not just the 2024 update, it's the Scarscape update, and that's epic. So, shit like that is epic. So, and then what else was there? The map
Your
pool.
Stargate has some really cringe update name recently. I'm trying to remember.
Well, maybe you can search that up because I'll just quickly rattle off the map names. We've got different names for our classifications of maps now. Class 1 maps are now Empire class maps, and then 2 is Uprising because those are like new ones that have to be tested. 3 is I think it's Bloodbath, is that right? And then the idea is that those are maps that have already been sort of had their time in the sun. They've been used in tournaments and they're retired now for the most part. Maybe we could look back at them for refurbishments later or whatever. And then class 4 is just Jester because why not? Honk. So, and that's pretty much it for the names. But we like to give everything cool names here. And we really, really don't like the idea that the Legionnaire would be renamed to Purifier. But Nablime is really, really hell bent on calling it Purifier every time for some
reason. I don't know why.
He's just a goofball. I don't know where that comes from. He's like, isn't there a Protoss unit in Cosmonarchy that's called that? And I was like, no, there's not. never had that. That's from like StarCraft 2. So that's kind of funny. But anyway, all that said, the competitive focus is definitely a thing that we have. We have these tournaments running. But obviously, we also want to make campaigns. We originally wanted to make campaigns like way back. That was the whole point, back in the days where we had map crap more commonly as like a weekly event or whatever. And then we had, all sorts of wild stuff that we would make.
Oh, I can't find it, but I think it's private to testers or something. But
yeah, probably.
I'm not a tester. But I found November update, which is one. And I think they had like an elephant update.
Elephant?
Yeah. Something like that. That was pretty funny. Found that hilarious.
Well, it's probably a unit name, I guess. I don't know. Maybe that's
no, it's not.
Oh,
no.
It's
no clue. An elephant update.
At least I don't think they actually went with Battle Thrall. They decided not to go with Battle Thrall. I can't believe that's a unit name they didn't go for. Shocking, honestly.
Shadow Flyer.
Is that really still in the game?
Yeah.
Okay. There was a guy who joined their Discord server like months ago, and he asked if the names in Cosmonarchy were placeholder names, and I just can't imagine asking that question about us, but not about Shadow Flyer, by the way. So anyway, if there's different strokes for different folks.
The unit
man.
doesn't even like the name doesn't make sense for the unit. It's just
a flyer,
dude. From Brood War.
Yeah. It's just as far as I say, it's just a scourge, but it's still. I guess the idea is that if you see its shadow over you, you will want to fly.
Hard.
You'll want to fly away from the shadow flyer.
Like talking about cargo culting, they definitely do that.
I do think it's. I mean, we've talked about this already a number of times, but it doesn't really feel like to me that a lot of the StarCraft 2 successors, if you will, like Stormgate and Zero Space, the RTSs that are trying to like copy from them or do better than them or be like the replacement game for them or something.
I feel like they are trying to be Warcraft 3, honestly. That's just my feeling.
I don't know. I feel like maybe in terms of combat pacing, they're a bit closer to that than StarCraft 2, which is probably fine. Like we've talked about combat pacing before and how there's, StarCraft 2's is way out of whack. But the idea of what they're aping is like Warcraft 3 was never a popular game. So like it was popular not because of its melee. So when you think about it from that perspective, I feel like if they're trying to ape after success, they're probably going to be doing so from StarCraft 2, which admittedly did have a lot of sales.
Well, I know that a lot of people have nostalgia to Warcraft. Like I know people that haven't really played. I know really RTS players that know Warcraft 3 and say good things about it, even though it's not that great.
Yeah.
So it's probably that, I guess. Anyways, let's talk campaign content, I guess. The context of why I was asking about campaign focus in the first place was because I was interested in writing a little bit, and I mean I'm not necessarily gonna be writing anything just yet, but I was like researching what makes a good writing.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, that was the Brandon someone channel
McNulty, on YouTube.
Yeah, his analysis was pretty nice to hear, and yeah, I was just interested in writing a little bit and what makes how to become better at it and how to even analyze things more critically, because that's something I have never developed. I'm not really that much of a story guy.
Mm-hmm.
Something I'll answer more later because there's a question related to that. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of nuance in your writing, and it's pretty cool to. It would be pretty cool to actually have some content to show to people. So I think there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, the writing part is interesting because I actually feel like the writing that I'm doing for the tutorials is a little watered down insofar as it feels
Mm.
like it's definitely being held back by the fact that obviously I have to dictate it based on the gameplay needs of it being a tutorial, right? So,
Yeah.
for example, like the Protoss tutorial, which I'm working on right now, so it's very topical in my mind, involves
Mm-hmm.
two Protoss Justicars, which is like the rank of a commanding officer or whatever. Technically, one of them is an initiate, so he's still rising. But the idea is that he'll be promoted to Justicar after a couple more, successful campaigns or whatever. And so he responds to some sort of distress signal, and
Yeah, what you just said is already out of my league. You're so good at like word building and like creating characters and having them have backgrounds and whatever. I think the rest just comes naturally, and sure, I can see there's untapped potential because of the environment we are in, and because this was a tutorial. But
right.
yeah,
Well, the tutorial, I mean, so I could talk a little bit about the character part, but the tutorial, the reason why I would say that it's kind of held back by that, or at least it's not going to achieve, it's not exactly the story I would tell under normal conditions, because I had to really stretch the premise in the first place for it to make sense for this. Because for
yeah,
those who don't know, in Cosmonarchy, there are sub factions within the races that change up the units that you have available to you, but also represent meaningfully different entities within the game world's universe. So what that means is if I have a Protoss nation, for example, or some sort of order, they're called orders instead of nations. So the Protoss order of the divine primacy, that is the prime sort of like, I mean, sort of in the name, right? The idea is this order, this whole section of Protoss is like the de facto power within the sector. And so the divine primacy is where you go for all of your general Protoss needs. This is where you're like most Protoss are in that, basically. That's a majority. But there's a lot of other significant powers that can't necessarily hold a candle specifically to the divine primacy and might not even be hostile to them, but you could plausibly have them fight each other. However, that would obviously involve changing the tech tree. And for the tutorial's sake, I wanted it to be a clean mirror matchup where you're fighting against Protoss of your faction. And I had just used the trope of it being a simulation, training sim or whatever, within the Terran tutorial. I didn't want to use that for Protoss because it doesn't really make sense to me that Protoss would even need that since they have this whole like Kala mind bending stuff going on. So they could probably run simulations in their brain or whatever. And maybe then you could still have some sort of gameplay representation of that, but it felt really lame to go from that from that to that, right? Simulation to
yeah, yeah,
simulation.
it would.
So I
I
decided
like
instead
the
to have this
idea
be
of it
oh, go ahead.
not being like a carbon copy of the previous thing. If it's like actually different, I feel like that feels more natural and
Mm-hmm.
not forced. So that is definitely a good thing in my book.
Right. But that does pose an awkward question because in lore, right, in the setting, there's not really any reason for divine primacy to fight each other. They're all part of the same sector, right? So it's not like
Right.
the training simulation where the Orion Imperium, which is like the de facto Terran power in the sector, is like, some equivalent could be like Confederacy or Dominion or whatever if you're more familiar with the original lore. Obviously, it's at a much higher scale in Cosmonarchy because everything's at a much higher scale. But with the Imperium, like, okay, they're not going to fight each other either in real stuff, but they can have a training sim where they fight each other, and that's fine. In the Protoss stuff, I didn't want the training sim trope anyway for them at all as like as a device, like as part of world building. I didn't want it to be that they use training simulations in the first place, like as
Yeah,
a general
right.
thing. So I already didn't like that idea, and it was already used just before. So there's many reasons to avoid it here. So that means I have to have it be
Right.
a live fire exercise, right? Like a real thing where this is actually a military operation, and that means I have to have a real justification for why real divine primacy forces would fight each other. And so I did come up with a solution for that. And it's not even something I'm going to expose to the player directly. I'm just going to leave breadcrumbs and they can try to figure it out if they want to. But I needed to know why that happened. And that meant that like the whole premise of the mission had to be very different and very non-standard, which already I'm not sure how I feel about given it's a tutorial. Like at least with the case of like a training sim, it's like, oh yeah, I know what a training sim is. Like I've seen this countless games or whatever. The thing that I'm doing here, I'm sure it had like something comparable has happened, but the fact that it's not told to you and you have to actually figure it out for yourself if you're even interested enough to do that means that it might actually be very strange considering it's supposed to be a tutorial. Like the gameplay part is going to be tutorialized, but the actual premise is like very dense and
I
hard to
suppose you
penetrate.
don't want to share the premise, right?
Yeah, I think it would be better. It would actually have. I mean, it probably wouldn't matter that much if you did know like what exactly the premise was, but I can DM it to you afterwards. So, or
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
just write it out really
I
really
think I
quickly
have
while you're
an
typing.
interesting idea. Is that what I would probably do if I were in your shoes? Is I would make it be like some trivial military operation where you have like a mentor and he takes you somewhere and you're supposed to do something trivial, but suddenly there's like an enemy that so it like essentially it escalates and he has to like mentor you quickly through like give you a quick lesson on
Mhm.
some things or whatever. I feel like that could work.
Yeah,
Actually,
the main the thing that's difficult about the premise is how do you justify your faction fighting you? That doesn't make sense in the. It's not at all what is supposed to be like the
and
way
it has
the
to be
race
the
works.
case because you wanted to have mirror matchups in tutorials, right?
Yeah, for the first mission that is supposed to like the idealized first mission of you playing as Protoss, you should probably fight Protoss
Mm.
because there's such a breadth of choice within Cosmonarchy. There's 150 units on it, like just about. So that means on average you're talking about around 50 units per race, and that's not factoring in the buildings. The buildings are added on top of that count. So when you have that amount, you've got to account for a lot of
Right.
things. I didn't want the players to also have to account for, oh,
Yeah,
this
I
guy's
guess it's
playing as
good to
Terran,
not
right?
have faction specific stuff in the tutorials
Yeah.
since that's a campaign only thing, anyways.
And like this teaches you things about the setting. It tutorializes you things about the setting, but all the tutorials do they act as introductions to the primary faction. So you get to understand a little bit about the command structure, how the Orion Imperium ascends its graduates and stuff, and like what kinds of things that they're put through, and the economy and stuff like that. So if you're interested in the world building, like you get a little bit of an insight into that, just like you will in the Protoss tutorial. So anyway, I sent you the actual justification, so you know it now. But the like, I obviously can't. Since you know what that means, I obviously can't actually just have that be said. I think it would take away from. It would kind of like get ahead of myself for future campaign content that uses the same mechanism. So I didn't
It's
want to just
yeah.
use it right and like immediately throw it out there. So uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and when you factor in the idea that like okay, the premise is very different, and what does that mean? I think at the end of the day, the premise is fine because it's just like a mystery, right? It's like you don't really know why this is happening, and the characters don't seem to know why, and they respond very much like this is not expected or normal, and it's a very severe issue that must be rectified immediately. So the way that the characterization is returning to your point about characters is like the characters are really good as vehicles for the player to understand the story and the setting, especially the setting part and the premises. So your protagonist character for this mission, the one that's like actually commanding in canon, is a guy who's obviously, like I said, he's an initiate. He's rising up the ranks. He's supposed to be promoted to an actual official captain, and he was sent here to respond to something that they thought was going to be a simple thing. They didn't think it was going to be a big deal, and then it was a big deal. So then he asks for assistance, and then somebody comes in who's very clearly, you can tell by the reaction of this rising recruit, this initiate character, that the guy that they sent to be my advisor is like a kind of a big deal, because the guy immediately is like, oh my god, I can't believe it's you, basically is like that's his response in dialogue, but it's written in a Protossy way.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
just by that, the way that we have this sort of thing going is like, why would they send a big deal character to monitor this unless it was a big deal situation? And it's a big deal because of the character's reaction, and the situation is a big deal because the character who is a big deal has a reaction that implies this is definitely not normal, or outright states this is definitely not
Yeah,
normal.
this definitely
So
feels very compelling and organic, I'd say.
right.
And yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how I would craft something like that myself, but I definitely would like to learn. And
And hey,
one
having a
thing
positive
that is
example of things is good, and that's the main thing.
yeah,
Is like
definitely.
not just to
Like
sit here and be like, "Oh, I'm writing super epic stuff all the time," because maybe I am, maybe I'm not. That's not really my place to say. But what I will say is that for the longest time, I didn't have a good example within gaming to say like, "Hey,
mm,
this is how you marry the story and the gameplay." And when I try to talk about it to people on this very channel, for example, a lot of them are like, "But is that even considered story, or can you even really do that?" Because they themselves haven't seen it either. So
yeah,
I'm hoping to be the counter example, but
yeah, it would
it
be nice.
would have been nice to have somebody
I
else do it too.
That does remind me about show don't tell, and actually
Hmm.
it's interesting because show don't tell was something that I believed in, and apparently there's also the idea of show and tell, and it's interesting how you can marry the two. But anyways, it definitely shows me that the example you brought up with the respected character being like known
Hmm.
and whatever the reaction being like very uh, oh I honor you or whatever.
Hmm.
It feels like it shows and tells, I guess, the position. It does world building and it accomplishes so much in so little is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that definitely feels compelling and it feels like the right choice to do.
Yeah. So, like, a way to think about it from a storytelling perspective too is like, what can we like? How much do I need to accomplish what I'm trying to say? So, I made a map for Mapcrap a while ago. I don't remember how much we talked about it in the past episodes of this show, but that map is called Anad's Greatsword, and it has a very compact briefing, but there's a lot within it, which you can choose to engage with, or you can choose not to. And if you look at the like, I don't think it's some. I'm not necessarily saying it's like a mega epic XD, but like the actual things that are there is like I think the briefing length is like around 2 minutes, maybe less, and it establishes who your character is, like who the protagonist character is, who's commanding, in canon, what his
Mm.
allies are, what his general demeanor, and like what kind of character he is, right? Like how would you describe him? You can describe him a little, pretty well, I would say, as like a quirky type of person after you just listen to that little exchange, and he's clearly a guy with some power and pull in the sector because he's pulling out allies like Protoss and Zerg to help him with this. And it's like, well, that's weird and different. And, on the one hand, he's very blasé about the Protoss, but he's excited about the Zergs. That also tells you something about, without him needing to say, I never get to play with Zerg, which would be like the stupid version of the dialogue event. You just have him be like wow, I really appreciate you helping me out here, aide who procured the Zerg ally. Like, that's crazy that you did that. That's basically like something that happens. And even that is like, if you analyze it and break it down in that way that I just did, it sounds like it's telling as opposed to showing, because it's like, well, by saying that he's really happy or he's very excited, by communicating that, it's like also communicating that this must not be something that happens all the time. So you can very easily make those logical leaps from A to B, and it's easy clap on the storytelling, right? So I don't need to say much more than that in the story. I don't need to have this line where he talks very lengthy about, say, he's always wanted to fight alongside Zerg, or the last time it was a long time ago, and like I don't need to worry about that, because those details can remain vague as to whether or not he's always wanted it, or whether or not he's never done it before, or whether or not it's something that's not exactly new, but it's been a while since he last did it, or whatever. Like, you get more information about his motivations and stuff as the map continues, but just from the briefing to establish things, I think it's very dense, and I don't think you need to know all of the details, what
Yeah.
every single
Right.
word means, because you can figure it out over time, right? I think that's a big thing. Most writers, especially early on, if they have a lot of things that they want to communicate, they end up front loading. And
Yeah,
it's
right.
not an
That's
efficient
true.
way of communicating, because you lose a lot from like the player kind of tuning it out or whatever in the early stages. So I think keeping things snappy, but also making it interesting with like good pacing, music, rhythm, whatever, with the dialogue being well voice acted and stuff. Production value definitely plays a part, but definitely the communication has
Sure
to be
does.
efficient, is what I would say, right? And so you want to make sure that you're not overloading it, even if you have a lot of words in there. If the characters are like kind of not skipping a beat and they're just talking like they would talk normally, the player will figure it out, like, oh, they said this
Yeah,
proper
right.
noun, like a tendril or whatever. Maybe I don't know what a tendril is, but they're talking about it, and eventually I'll figure it out through context. Like, I think that's fine
Yeah,
in some
it's like
ways.
not
Yeah.
only it's like efficient and effective the way your goal is,
Mhm.
it also gives more room for player to imagine, and it also gives more uh desire to learn more, I guess, if you don't just state everything as obvious, especially if you avoid this like as you know Bob thing that I've heard about. So like when a character says, as you know,
Mhm.
there's this Zerg thing, or as you know,
Yeah.
we do not like this faction and
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
should kill them. It's just yeah, it's I think the way you write is pretty cool, and it seems to accomplish a lot in. not a lot. And the thing I really like about story writing in RTSs is more the thematics, and I feel like characters are not themselves like that important, and what is important is that they're essentially like told to explore the world and the bigger scale thing. They're just pawns in the big scale thing. And what really matters to me, I guess, when I'm playing a campaign is like feeling feeling the world actually uh how would I even say it exists or whatever. It's like really cool. Like I feel like it's I always liked like the Zerg presentation, even though like no StarCraft game really did that well story wise.
Hmm.
I always liked the thematic of the Zerg, and I always like was interesting about like how there's like this force of nature that you're fighting, and they're like uh it's interesting that you have to pose yourself like the questions and everything, and
Yeah.
if you see this thematic just force of nature big bowl of like alien whatever that just like consumes everything, and you see like I'd rather see like a big uh so if you imagine like the 7 Terran mission in Brood War, I think,
Okay.
and in original vanilla where there's like this horde of Zerg that exists. If imagine if that mission was actually showed you like I don't know, let's imagine 3,000 Zerg units on the map. That would be so epic, so thematic for
Hmm.
them. It would actually be so believable, and I don't know. It's just like the thematic is more important to me than the other stuff, and I think characters can be a really good vessel to explore the world and
Hmm.
the thematics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's pretty in line with what I was saying earlier about how characters can be really good as these vehicles for the player to sort of like attach themselves to, and that can be used as a vector for like lapping up all of the world building and soaking it all in. Because if you're interested, like what you're saying, you it sound like you were mentioning that the world is like you wanted the world to exist, right? And so if
Mm-hmm.
that's the case, my question would then be like, by that, do you mean that you want the world to make sense as if like you could imagine not being like not playing the game and not being a part of whatever conflict is going on, but that conflict would still have resolutions. Like you could map it out. Like
Right.
it's not just like these enemies are here to slow you down. It's like they represent interests of other things. The world is alive. There's, things happening all across the universe, that kind of thing. Is that what
So I guess
more or
my
less what you
example
meant?
would be if there's a Zerg invasion or
Right.
something and it consumes like a whole sector or something, it shouldn't really matter what characters you're presented because the event is already there and the characters are, and the race is already there and the event is still happening anyways, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you picture the event of like one planet being consumed by them or whatever, uh, the story and characters would probably be pretty similar to like another world that has they're invading them. So it doesn't really matter what characters and uh, what story exact like
The specific plot doesn't necessarily need to
yeah,
be.
it doesn't necessarily matter that much in at least in RTSs I feel like because it's
Yeah. What you're kind of hinting at something where I think there's a limit to how like there's only a limited number of high level zoomed out summary, this is what the plot is. Like there's if you think about zooming it out just like this,
mm,
this race invades this location and these races are on that planet. That's kind of your plot or whatever, right? And then like, you can go a little bit deeper and be like, and this character does this to fight back and like this is how it if you understand the
yeah,
dynamics of the races and if you understand how they conduct warfare, then you're limited in how many plots you can actually have, how many different plot elements can actually exist in the
right,
first place, because it's like, well, we're telling an RTS story, so that means the story has to be explored via the play of an RTS game. And so we need to have the military conflicts and we need to represent them somehow. And
right,
blah, 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 blah. Eventually you realize okay, if the Zerg are invading, this is kind of what they do. If they do something different, it has to be for a reason. So that's where you can add some variance to the plot.
Mm-hmm.
If the other
Yeah.
people are responding in a different way, that has to be for another reason. And you can still have wiggle room there, but like the zoomed out plot of race X invades Y, and Z character is serving as the character that's responding to that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. I
there's an element
think
where
the
the
characters are useful because they can really show what a race is like believing in, I guess,
Mhm.
and you it can. Yeah, I think they show a lot about the surrounding world and well-built characters that have their own story too and have their hero of their own story, but also like they participate in this like big conflict, and it shows like it also like shows the tendencies of given race and given factions and maybe given locations or whatever. So so yeah, I think that's it's definitely very useful, but it's also not. I feel like not the point of RTS storytelling is not the. It's not the melodrama from Brood War. Essentially, it's the thematic. It's the racial conflict. It's the stories that naturally arise from a universe where there's like all the planets, all the races, all the
Mhm.
sectors. It's just naturally a thing that would happen if you just manifested a universe like that, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
No, yeah, I've said before that if you understand the motivations of the power players within a story, you can understand the plot as well. You can make up at least a template plot that you can then think about and analyze.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, I was talking about the Protoss tutorial, obviously, and the reason why it was so difficult to come up with a premise that worked is because I understand these factions and these races and stuff, and it's like, well, this
Yeah,
faction of this
yeah.
race would never
It
fight
feels
itself, right?
like
So
you understand the factions by heart. I know you like created them and all,
yeah.
but it's like I can. My closest analogy is when I code, when I program, and I just like subconsciously know everything that is happening,
Yeah.
and I'm in the flow state. That's how it feels when you're describing your like story writing because you are really living the world, and you don't even have to often ask questions about
Hmm.
things. You just know the answer. You know that oh, this race would never do this. This
Right.
faction would always do that. Like Myrian will have the most random question about like the storytelling, and you already know the answer. It's just
Well, sometimes I have to
you're
think
really
about the
living it.
answer, but the answer is
Yeah, right.
revealed by the information that
That's
I
true.
already know, right? My understanding of the races like reveals it because I don't know like what food and Sifi eat or whatever. Like if you're
Yeah,
gonna ask that kind of
true.
question, but I can tell you that they have much bigger jaw strength than humans, and so they probably really like fucking steak or something. I don't know, like they probably really like
Yeah,
chewy
steak
meat
sounds
or
very.
whatever. Because that like and I
Yeah,
so I can tell you like a little
sounds
bit.
logical.
Yeah, yeah, and so
It's
that
nice that you can conclude those things just because you know the world so well, right?
right. Yeah, and so I think
It is a discovery for sure.
you were saying earlier that like you would like to write stuff like that, but you're not really sure how you would start. And I think if you're going to start anywhere, it's knowing the world and environment in which you're trying to tell a story, because that
Right.
will kind of automate the things like the decisions that you make, at least to do something initially, and then it's like okay, well,
Although
you
I
know,
feel like I would have trouble creating concrete characters because, like I said, I feel like they don't really matter that much. It's
mhm,
more the overarching story, the overarching event is what matters for me, the thematic,
right.
uh, the whatever. So I'm
Well,
not sure.
yeah, and part of that is also
I'm just
understanding
not
character
experienced
dynamics
enough, right?
too. It's like so what I said earlier about power players, like when I made Anad's Greatsword, it was like one of the first times making a campaign mission or campaign style
Mm-hmm.
mission where the character or a character within it is like kind of its own power play, because most of the time you
Mm-hmm.
don't have a character being a power player. You have the character as like one of many characters representing a faction, and that faction or that race or whatever is the power player in the story or a power player in the story. And so it's like, okay, there's a campaign that we're working on called To Touch the Sun, and in To Touch the Sun you play from the perspective of the Orion Imperium, and you're this kind of new Terran cadet type character who's just graduated in the officer academy, and you show up to this place where there's been some rebels sighted, but otherwise it's been fairly peaceful. And then one thing leads to another, and Zerg show up, and it's like, and then Protoss show up. It's like, whoa, what the fuck is happening? And so like we have to ease into that obviously over the course of many missions, but the concept is there pretty early on that this character is this way. He's like still pretty new or whatever. So I kind of know like what he can do, but I also know that he's nothing without the infrastructure around him that's given to him by his faction's position in the world. In Anad's Greatsword, the character is kind of the faction. Like technically he uses Hekaton coalition faction stuff, but I never explain how he gets access to that. Is he part of the Hekaton coalition? Well, that doesn't seem like it because he never makes any mention of it, where he makes explicit mention of a bunch of other stuff. And then it's like, so there's like a lot of things where it's like, oh, well, why is he even doing that? Is it just a lark? Like, because that's the kind of character that you might even get out of this guy.
It's interesting because you have to really believe what you're writing, right? Because when I think of like Blizzard writing, I'm thinking they probably didn't intend this, so I probably shouldn't believe it.
Oh yeah,
it's
sure.
probably not that deep.
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
if
absolutely.
You're saying something, then there's like a whole set of consequences that actually entails, and it's kind of even difficult to sometimes figure out what's actually happening because I'm just not used to deep writing, good writing.
Sure, yeah.
So, yeah.
No, yeah, and that's good too because we talked about low expectations, and I think that's the right kind of expectation to have about story writing most of the time, especially in video games and in popular media in general.
Especially when you see things being retconned and like not treated seriously, and just like random things suddenly are not true, and it's like
because like there are retcons. There are probably small retcons here and there within Cosmonarchy's lore in a way where it's like, I mean, if you want to get technical, it's like, hey, we used to have, cohorts trained from the scrapyard, which used to be a structure you built as a factory instead of an add-on to your fulcrum. So like, there's stuff like that where it's like, okay, we've decided to change the setting or whatever so that this, or like we've decided to change the gameplay. The gameplay has a meaningful impact on what is possible within the setting in terms of mechanistics, like what kind of things you can even do. What kind of tech you have, and that sort of stuff. And so it's like, and then like we made revisions to like mind control and infestation, and like that actually does impact on the story, because if I have an infested character, then I would want it to actually be like infested in the same way that a unit is infested in the story, or in the game rather. So like I would want there to be parity there where you could believe that. Just like if I have a unit, say that there's like a unit which is reclaimed, or a character which is reclaimed. Well, like he better be in some kind of environment where he is constantly being healed, because now there's an effect HP drain. It's like, okay, great. So like now I know that. And so I have to build that around the story. And so there's probably little things like that where some of the released content might be built on assumptions which are not true anymore. They're built on like what the game used to be. Right. But we didn't really release that much content, so we're probably fine with that. But
infestation, that gives me some things to talk about.
Sure, yeah.
Blissful Embrace got reworked. That's pretty cool. It's the basest thing ever.
Yeah.
And it actually reminds me that when I was a kid, when I played like StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty, I really liked that the Zerg had infestation, and that they had like drop pods and niduses. I felt they were super thematic, and it made sense. They would like invade the world in such a like invasive manner, and I really liked the thematic, but then when I tried to do any of that, I wasn't able to, because the game didn't have it.
Yeah.
And
like in the
it
game,
felt so lackluster. Yeah. And niduses were the only thing that you had, but they also function differently because they have a channel time. So it felt very, very sad that it like worked completely differently. And I wish they actually fucking actualized the idea. And the other thing that I remembered is that regarding Anna's Greatsword, when we were last recording Crow's Nest, that was in the middle of Mapcraft, so you have definitely not done it yet.
Right, yeah. Okay, so I haven't talked about it at all. Well, and you get a little bit of information on it. You can play it. It's available. I haven't gone back and updated it post Mapcraft, so there's some cheese strats you can
Some
do.
people even play the Zerg.
I know, yeah. Apparently
which requires an edit.
Yeah, there's a couple of people who have been like opening it up in the editor and replacing the units because I don't know if they know this, but originally Anad's Greatsword was going to be a pick your race map. So like it's kind of funny that somebody ended up doing that because it's like almost the true
Mm,
like one of the original ideas that I
yeah.
had for the map now being used. So, but
Mm,
yeah, so
it's pretty cool.
the main I guess like the main way to think about like some more story related gameplay related thoughts is that like you mentioned like oh, this thing happens in Blizzard writing and it's probably not that deep, so just
Yeah, one
disregard it.
thing
Go
I
ahead.
just remembered about the low expectations of writing is
Hmm.
that often it feels like the story justification is an afterthought, which is why I
Okay.
would not take it seriously. Where something is said just to justify an idea, but is not taken to the full extent. So it actually feels lackluster, and it feels like you cannot trust anything that is being said in a story because it's not ever always fully true. And you just have to have this. You have to not fully accept things as facts, and and you have to like not fully believe it, which
Hmm.
is like in opposite to what you're doing because
Yeah.
you're actually trying to fully actualize it, which is great.
Well, and I appreciate that. The thing that comes to mind as a response, I always drop this as like a writing advice related to StarCraft, is that in Brood War, there's a line that Kerrigan says about Zeratul being a very formidable opponent, and it's like,
Huh.
well, you wouldn't need to say that. Like you could again, going back to what I said earlier about like the characters
Well, if you
reacting to
wanted to
things.
tell that, you would probably say it in a different way.
Yeah, you would have Kerrigan say, "Damn it, I can't believe we have to face Zeratul." You know, something like that. Ideally, better than just that off the top of my head.
Or
But like,
even better, you would actually mention some consequence of him being formidable.
yeah, I mean, you could have
Uh,
like you maybe you wouldn't have that be in the one-liner, but you might have that be in the game as like watch out for this and that, which would be tactics related to like what Zeratul
right.
does, right, in the game. And that's where I'm getting
Mm.
it. The point I'm getting as you said that like, oh, this doesn't seem true. You shouldn't really believe it. Well, if you like, there's two points to this. There's two steps to this point. And the first step is if you really believe that Zeratul was a formidable opponent, then you would treat him very much with respect that he is undue in the game. You, as the player, would play as if he was really good, even though he's actually a pushover. And that's sort of what I'm getting at is like that's step one or point one, right? And it's like, okay, you can't really believe that, just like what Veeq said. You can't fully believe that he's a good player because if you do, or a good commander, right? A good leader of men. You can't believe that because if you believe that, then you'll actually play in a way that is not even close to optimal or even necessary. You might still win anyway because you're being
And
conservative,
you
but
just get a
you
lot of
don't need to.
narrative dissonance because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the second step to this point is you by the end of Brood War, you still don't even know what makes a good commander or good player in more
True.
gameplay related terms.
Yeah.
You haven't actually been taught accurate lessons of what it is. And we talked about this with the Electric Underground a lot. Is like you know the if you were
Cool guy.
actually if you had to play, yeah, he's a very cool guy. If you had to play as a good player in order to win the single player content, then you'd be a lot better, you know, prepared for multiplayer, even psychologically, let alone like in actual strategic sense and understand game sense or whatever. So I feel like that's another failing of the narrative in a way is that not only should I not believe what Kerrigan is saying about and she's not supposed to be like an unreliable narrator, so there's not really any excuse for this. But you're not supposed to believe that Zeratul is a
Mm.
competent enemy, and you're also not even really shown what a competent enemy looks like because there are no competent enemies in StarCraft One, and for that matter, StarCraft Two, in terms of the actual in-game representation. And that's where I think that's where a lot of it falls down. Actually, it's like
Yeah.
when okay in the Terran tutorial, you're fighting in a training simulation, so the stakes are not really that high, but the
I
stakes
feel
are
like one thing about
go ahead.
RTS storytelling that I just thought of is that you actually can never really fully have proper representation because your enemy is always bigger than the map.
How do you mean?
So, like in the example of StarCraft 2, if you're fighting the minion, it's like on like many planets or whatever. So you're always just fighting a commander or something, and he probably has forces outside of the planet or whatever. But yeah, I think in general it's true that they should try to be competent at least on the map, right? Because like I feel that there's always like a little bit of ludonarrative dissonance because of the fact that you are stuck on a map that has boundaries and that like no units can come from outside of it and stuff like that. But it's definitely very important to present your opponents to be as competent as they are told,
Yeah,
or as they're presented
I think the
in
boundary
the
is
story.
like the map borders or whatever is kind of, you almost don't even think about that as the player. I mean, I guess you
Mm.
might, Veek, but like most people I've talked with are like, yeah, the borders, yeah, whatever. Like they don't even know, they don't even say yeah the borders. They don't even think about the borders because it's just like such an automatic thing. So I don't know if that actually hits the dissonance. I mean, it's kind of like you can make a good enough sort of like hand wave for that, which is just to say that like, oh, you don't really need to worry about that because the like this is the area where the battle is taking place, and like there's not really a reason for it to stretch out elsewhere, or whatever. Like you can imagine why it could be localized into a couple of regions. Like maybe you're defending something, or maybe you're attacking something specific, and it's like in an area, and that's
Hmm.
why you have to do it.
Yeah,
And
sure.
maybe that doesn't apply to every single thing, but that's why some maps are going to be bigger than others, and you can kind of just say
Hmm.
anything else is just out of scope for the battle, and you can kind of have that be like the implicit understanding of it.
Yeah,
And
it's
so I
probably
think that probably
better when
works.
you have map sizes bigger than 256 by 256, like in
Right.
our actual engine eventually.
Right. Yeah.
Where you can make like a 500 by 500 or like 1000 by 1000, and you just like some parts of the map you would never even access because they're just
Right.
so far away, but they still affect change on the map, and you can technically go there. It's just probably not that important to do that. I feel like that could be very compelling.
Yeah. It'd be
Anyways.
something I would be interested in exploring. The point that I was going to make about the general like presentation or storytelling is that like we were talking about like, okay, can you trust what characters say? Can you trust what the story is telling you? Should you even believe it?
Hmm.
And one of the things that contributes to that is like the inflation of stakes. And that's one of the reasons why I'm actually really glad that the first mission that people normally play is like literally a training simulation, because the stakes are
Right.
kind of high if you buy into the characters personally. Because one of your characters, your military aide there, your best buddy from the training academy is like, hey, if you don't get in, I might not be able to come back and try another time because I don't have that much money left or whatever. And so that's like a more specific thing. Is like I can't afford to go back for another semester unless you cover my ass with
I
your
know
fucking
where you're
officer
going
salary.
with this.
So it's what did you say?
I know where you're going with this.
Well, okay. So the point is like, okay, that's the stake. Is like I gotta fight for my homie and get his. And also, I don't like this guy that's my training commander because he's like an asshole. So I just want to kill him and defeat him in this exercise. And then also, I'm going for greatness. I want to qualify and become an actual officer, right? I want to like get the call up and graduate from this academy. And so if you buy into the characterization anyway, those are your stakes. And that's very much character driven. That's very much based on like their background. And yet the actual stakes of like if you fail in the mission, well, nothing happens. Like your character doesn't die. Maybe it won't. Maybe it will, or it won't be like a particularly rough time for your friend. But it's not really established that your character is too worried about this. So, it's probably fine. Like it's a little unfortunate. You don't want to lose, but like you
Yeah.
only really get super hell bent on the idea if you're like invested in the characters, and hopefully I do a good enough job with that, with the
Right.
actual voice acting and the presentation layer and the script writing and stuff, that people do that. But like that's the idea, is like, okay, we're stepping back and we're in a training sim. It's like the worst thing that can happen is you lose digital, like digitized versions of your units. Like they're not even real units in the actual sim. So anyway, all that said,
Yeah, like I was alluding to with thematics and ideas,
yeah.
it doesn't really matter. The character is just a vessel, right? It's just in RTS context. So it's good if you're invested in them, but technically it shouldn't flip the universe on its side if they die, right?
And that's kind of what they try to do in a lot of other
Yeah.
RTS games, where they're saying, "Oh, the fate of the galaxy depends on us," and that's like Tassadar's line at the end of the vanilla StarCraft One Protoss campaign. The final mission before Brood War is like him saying that if they don't stop the Overmind there, he's going to take over the fucking universe. It's like that's a little much. Like I don't think the stakes are that high considering how ineffective he is as an actual commander. And then you also think about StarCraft 2 and a lot of other RTS plots. It's just like they jump the gun, or jump the shark rather,
It's
too much, right?
ridiculous how much Jim Raynor progresses from first Brood War, from first Vanilla StarCraft 1 mission to the last epilogue of StarCraft 2 is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
The
And
power
it's
progression.
and he doesn't actually grow that much. Like if you wanted to tell me a story about a backwater space cowboy eventually helping to kill a space god, you don't need that much real estate to tell that story. Even you don't need 6 campaigns or whatever it was. Well, I guess 9 campaigns because it was the 6 for Brood War and then the 3 of Wings of
Yeah,
Liberty.
maybe it's just
You know, sort of thing.
Marvelization
Yeah,
of everything.
I'm just saying you could do that kind of story justice. You could do it properly in much less time if you wanted to. But they had all that time, and because partially that wasn't their end goal anyway. Like that, they never envisioned that as the final destination of their story.
It was designed by a committee
Yeah,
in a
they
company
did
that
not do a good
doesn't.
job. They did not do a good job.
Yeah.
I do not believe that a fucking space hick led a rebellion insurgency multiple times actually, and his last one was against a dark god. No, I don't. I actually don't believe that. I think
Yeah,
that's
he falls
probably a
apart.
fever dream or something. So
I don't know. I remember when I only knew Wings of Liberty shallowy. I felt like it's like believable, and like the thematics were what mattered for me, anyways.
right.
And
Yeah.
I was kind of sad some of them were unexplored or whatever.
Mhm.
But when you put it into context and see all the like ridiculous scale that they add, it just seems so ridiculous.
Well, the nail in the coffin. Well, there were many nails in the coffin. One of the things that really underscored it for me was on the Legacy of the Void mission where you're holding out in a temple, the Zelnaga temple on Shakuras, and you're gonna like use it to blow up the planet. And they just have a counter in the top right that's like 579 billion Zerg are on this planet. And it's like, oh yeah, great. Thanks for telling me and not showing me because there's no way your engine could handle that many units. And hey, that's not even necessarily a disc because that's really hard to get billions of units. Like, I don't even know how you would do that. You couldn't even
I
probably
don't
draw that
know.
many triangles on the fucking screen. So, like, good luck actually doing that even in the total annihilation menu.
True.
But like, still, why have that be a thing in your narrative if
Yeah,
you're not
we
even going to
once
bother
had
doing
that
it?
ambition,
Yeah, well,
thinking we can make a complex game with that many units.
I don't think it was that many. It was like 500,000 or something. So, pretty good. We can
It's
do it.
not that many, no.
We do it. Easy clap.
I think most rendering engines don't draw that many sprites. Maybe they do. No, sprites they probably draw that many, even more. But anyways,
So you're telling me there's a chance. No, we'll
speaking
figure
about
that out.
rendering, I should probably learn Vulkan eventually.
Dude, imagine Vulcan Q7.
Fine. Vulkan Q7.
We've talked a lot about story so far, but I know that there's other topics you wanted to get to. I don't know if there was any sort of final points you had. For me, I wanted to wrap it up in the conversation talking about
just
like
musings and writing and
yeah.
stuff. So.
The way that there are ways to do good story writing in the RTS. Just that you haven't seen it.
I want to
isn't that
learn
big?
more.
Yeah, so and that's another very good reason to make single player content for Cosmonarchy. The other major reasons are that we don't have that much and we need more, and it's an underexplored area of our work right now.
Summarizing, we'll focus on competitive play and campaign content going forward, and it's pretty exciting.
I'd say so. So, what is our next topic then? Are we going to talk about the code quality and musings and stuff like that? About
Yeah. So I was thinking about like how we write code, and I think I generally lately been trying to write more robust code that is more harder to break and doesn't have random regressions and that is actually organized. And I think it's been a pretty cool thing. And you can see some of that with the fraud launcher, especially when you see fraud launcher 2.1, which I hope will actually be even more sweet and pleasant to use. But we'll see. Probably will blow it up because I have high hopes and it will just be a disaster instead. I'm joking, but I think it's pretty important to focus uh, on writing good code that doesn't bite you back. And I've experienced GPTP and Antikythera grow uh, to being spaghetti mess, and I think it's important for me to focus on uh, on improving the code that we already have. It's always good to. I always believe that it's better to have less code rather than more code if you can help it.
yeah.
Since that means it's easier to maintain. And if it accomplishes the same thing with less lines of code, that means it's better because it's simpler to maintain and it's easier to understand. It's possible to understand. You can't hold the entire GPTP in your head at once.
No.
And not even Antikythera, I don't think. There's a lot of things, and it's better. It's good to simplify them early rather than later because you end up with just those like thousands line long functions that are unmaintainable and have bugs in them that are not fathomable. And yeah, it's good to write good code. And I was wondering how to do code review, and if you guys have ideas, that would be nice. But we are essentially not doing pull requests, and I don't know if we should because pull requests are kind of would slow us down a lot, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And it would be nice to do some formal code review from time to time because otherwise it's pretty. We can have bugs that just come from like misunderstanding of intentions or
Yeah.
whatever, and it's good to catch them early. So if you guys have ideas for code review, let us know. And yeah, you wanted to say something about concrete tasks and ambiguous tasks. Do you
Yeah.
remember what that was?
The thing for me is, and it in many ways it's actually related to the code quality, and I also wrote here tool quality. In many respects, it's like
Mm,
I've been thinking about our priorities. Something obviously we just talked about competitive content or competitive play, campaign content. Like, what's the deal with that? What are we focusing on? We've got a lot of thoughts for both, and we've been making a lot of progress on both. But we still, what should we actually be putting all of our effort into? And one of the things that mostly negatively impacts competitive play, like it disproportionately impacts competitive play, and also impacts co-op play. So there's definitely reasons to fix it, no matter what. Are the desyncs that were a little bit more common until very recently when we made some nice headway on that. And
mm.
you and I talked about how it's. You mentioned that it's quite difficult to like have this one task that you're not really sure how to do anything on and like what leads we have and like where to even go for leads, and it's very ambiguous as to what you can actually do on it.
Yeah.
And it's a lot harder to spend time working on that because you have to spend time working on figuring out what to work on related to that task.
Yeah,
And
ambiguous task definitely tank my productivity like
yeah,
100 times fold probably because if I know what to do and I catch a good flow,
mhm,
it's just subconsciously flowing. My mind is just accomplishing things. It's like
yeah,
moving this code there, calling this function, adding this type, doing this quick like cut and paste, like renaming this, doing that. It's just fast. It's like it takes me no formal thought to do that. It's just intuitive. It's subconscious. It's like the mastery part, the thing I'm good at. But then when there's this ambiguous task and I'm trying to like design something, trying to suggest things to resolve it, it's just difficult because these things are notoriously hard to track, and
mhm,
it's like looking for a needle in a haystack or whatever
yeah,
the
yeah.
the saying is. It's really really hard, and there's no concrete thing you can do. It's always just guesses, and it takes you so much time and like the there's actually a book, Thinking Fast and Slow, I remember.
Mhm.
And there's System 1 and System 2. And like spending time in System 1, I believe, the slow one, is so inefficient compared to spending time in System 2. Where you're just like you know your craft, you're just writing a lot of things and it works and it's good. That's what you want to do. But then when you have to figure out things, you have to like research things
Yeah.
and or guess or like try random trial and error, that's when the productivity tanks, especially for me. So
And I feel like it's a good thing to know about how we work and like what things we can improve on. And so far, my hypothesis is that we should probably have concrete tasks where we know what to do, we know what needs to be done to make progress on, and maybe have two or three of those to juggle because sometimes you'll be in the mood for one over the other, and have try to
yeah,
limit the number of ambiguous tasks to like at most one that we're kind of like fully focusing on, right? And they might also gravitate between them. Like you might get information about a high
yeah, with
priority
iScript
ambiguous
extension,
task. Yeah,
X405 has been active recently and it's pretty cool. I have some concrete ideas of what I can
yes.
do
And that's
to
what I was
help
saying is for a
the
long
progress.
time, that particular tool that is going to allow us to add the fourth race that we talked about on this program before, the iScript extender, when we get it operational, that was for the longest time a very ambiguous task. We didn't really know how to make headway on it. And so,
Oh, funnily enough, Front Launcher was also this task ambiguous. The 3 month trial to make it work in Rust.
Right.
ended in 3 day just straight up smash in C sharp. Like I worked for like 6 to 8 hours a day, I think,
Hmm.
to really smash it,
Right.
and
But you
it
actually had
just
the
was progress
ability to
after
make that
progress.
momentum, though, right? Because it's like you actually can do
Yeah.
it. It's concrete. It's not ambiguous. That's sort of what I was
Yeah, I
thinking.
always knew the next step I need to do, and
Yeah.
it was like it was so fast. It was so like the language didn't go in my way, and I'm not saying that. I feel like Rust is better than I gave it credit to, but it's also very hard, and also some things just broke for me where my add-on
Right.
didn't work at all, and I had to like. It was really annoying, ambiguous, and cumbersome, I'd say. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, and C sharp just flowed.
And that's the thing
Be
is
cool.
like you can take a high priority task that is currently ambiguous and you can ask for help or rely on other people, maybe in the case of like Akko and X405. And you can say, like, okay, well, at least we have these specialists who might be able to help us move that from ambiguous to concrete. But I don't know, like in a way, you can probably break it down in a different way mentally. You can probably say, like, well, my
Yeah.
concrete task
Well,
is
when
to
I
move
was
it from
making
ambiguous to concrete. But like, you have to figure out a way
true.
to do that. So
Oh no, that's ambiguous. You can concretely do that. I
yeah,
don't
you
think.
can. You just do it.
But one thing about ambiguous, with C sharp, when I was learning the Windows presentation layer,
Mm-hmm.
it was ambiguous because I didn't know it, but it was concrete because I knew what I need to learn and how to research it. And it was actually really quick
Sure, yeah.
because the moment I needed to know something, I just Google it and I already had the answer, and then it usually would flow from there.
And
So
that's probably how you would do it
there's
with the iScript extension too, is like asking X405 to help you out or whatever.
yeah,
Or
right. The worst thing is when you can get no help and there's no documentation
yep,
and you just have to like trial and error it or like hope for a key inside like with these things.
yeah,
Like we actually got a key inside about the null sprite problem being the cause of some of them, and DF was able to fix them.
yeah. And
And
on top of
now we
that,
have less
we
these
were
things. I'm pretty sure.
we were also able to. Well, we do have less these things for sure now. There's still a couple, or at least one in there, but that's like a different. The key insight there is that like the last random number is not right, so there's clearly something random in the game that's like kind of low
Oh,
percentage.
okay.
So
Yeah, that's the one that's more reasonable.
yeah,
The previous one was really hard to track. It
yeah,
was the the symptoms of it were so unclear. The data that we got was not easily correlated to the cause,
yeah,
I guess I would
absolutely.
say.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
it turned out to be like a redraw flag not being applied somewhere in the image. So, that's whatever. That's like nuts and bolts stuff. But
Mhm.
I'm glad that we've resolved it because it will make the game a lot more sensible to run through. So, anyway, all that said, as we move away from having that, like, we can eventually put the desyncs in the rear view mirror as far as we know, we'll be able to like resolve all these ones, and that's great. So I guess maybe we can just talk about a little bit about like that, the iScript stuff, and what else we might be doing in the future, like
Yeah,
up next,
currently
right?
my plan is to write an iScript parser, so basically parse the iScript txt to something we can use.
Yeah.
And since I will be using a little bit more of like STL in C++, it will probably take me shorter time since I won't be bootstrapping everything for
Well, yeah,
myself,
that was
which
something
is
else I
kind
wanted
of
to bring up in
ridiculous.
the last section is like one thing that will make things much more ambiguous is if you have to do everything from scratch, which we found out with
Yeah,
Antikythera, right?
yeah,
The
exactly.
old
So
stuff
I
anyway.
try to I try to use the tools they have at hand, and like I think I know C++ fairly well by now, so I can do that. And it's a powerful tool, but it's also sometimes not very well designed. Where some things were it's designed by committee, so some choices were not that great, and we are now replaying the effect of it. But it's fine. I know how to use it well, so and if I need to, I can later rewrite it in something more custom. And what is important is getting something running. And another thing I was thinking of, I'm still wondering what I want, but I bought the Cosmonarchy.com domain,
Mm,
and I would like to host a new website on it, which has
right.
like a download link to the launcher, and it has like a better text revisualizer, like text revisualizer 2.0. But I have to still, I'm wondering what I will use for it. I'm researching that. And it's not the biggest priority because we would want the scripters and these things fixed. Probably will also work in places to increase robustness. Another idea I had was rewrite status handling in GPTP so we can make it more robust and more uh,
Yep.
formalized, I guess, in a way where every status would behave using the same code rather than being essentially handwritten, where we only have some few like basic primitives, like essentially the alternative of variables as the Unity XT thing if you want to look at the source code. And yeah, it would be good to formalize it because then we can reduce the amount of bugs that happen because just one behavior was coded in this specific way and suddenly like
Yeah.
the worshipping status doesn't spawn if it spreads to another unit. Because currently it spreads from like
Right. Right.
factories to units. And it doesn't work because it wasn't coded as robustly as I coded Blissful Embrace, and now I'd have to go back and try to correct it instead of having like a unified system, uh, which unfortunately usually involves like virtual functions or whatever. I mean, I can do it without them, but uh, yeah, it's just something I was avoiding because I thought there's no clean way of doing it, but it's important to do it, I think.
It's also important that we answer our donators' questions. Are you ready for that, Veek?
Exactly.
All right, all right. So, if you guys aren't aware, you can donate to the work that we are doing. You can contribute financially to the future of the RTS and maybe other genres later down the line. We do accept payments via the coffee link in the description box. And that also means that as a perk, you get to ask questions, which Vika and I will answer now. The first question comes from Three Crow. This is actually from way back. He posed this question, then we subbed out a different question for his question. So now his question is: can you go over the Xibalba regencies and discuss any ideas you have about the regencies that are different or similar, and how you would meet in the middle on those ideas? I guess what he's saying basically is, uh, do we have any disagreements or different ideas about Xibalba regencies? And if we do, how we would compromise on them? That seems to be something that he's getting at. Um, but I guess in keeping with some of the stuff we talked about earlier about like factions within Cosmonarchy and stuff, it's like a bit obviously I know this stuff inside and out, and you're a little bit more surface level on it insofar as we've talked about it and you've read the documentation on the regencies, but you don't have the same like nuts and bolts understanding. So I guess I'm just curious. I don't even know where you want to go with this question, but do you have any thoughts?
I
But I don't.
think your world building is pretty good. So
Yeah.
I will
Oh,
just trust your
thanks.
judgment on that.
Yeah. I
Uh,
suppose what we can do as a stand-in
One
for this
thing
question. Oh, go ahead.
I can say is that I would want to explore a fantasy setting
Right.
eventually. So that's probably something I would like to do. 'Cause I always found that very appealing. Having like I don't necessarily like magic that much, but I like mythical creatures and like elemental stuff. I guess things
Hmm.
that are uh, well supernatural too, but it's like I don't know. I like the various interesting creatures you come across between mythologies and other things. So that's something I would probably make a setting about. But for now, I trust you with Xibalba, and I think it's pretty good.
Oh, I appreciate that. I guess what I'll say is it'll be interesting to see how many of the like core ideas behind the regencies are communicated accurately based on like what people's initial idea of them are based on their text that is all currently that's all that's available for them on the site versus what they actually end up like when we have them in gameplay. And kind of like, a cute way to A/B test that or beta test that is the Escozi, right? Because they're going to be added to Cosmonarchy,
Mm.
and that's from Xibalba. So they're not like an entire regency, but they are a race from Xibalba. And so seeing what people think of them based on their write ups and stuff versus what they actually end up looking like and being like in terms of execution is going to be interesting to check out anyway. So.
Mm. Yeah, so as you can tell, Freakrow, I have some strong opinions about gameplay and design and programming, but story-wise, I think Pr0nogo is doing pretty well. So, and I'm not that good yet. So
Well, there you
want
go.
to want to improve, want to learn, and this is definitely the most interesting setting in RTS that was probably ever created, to my knowledge.
Aw.
I guess maybe Warhammer is also that, but they have never experienced it. So
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, it'd be interesting if you ever end up checking it out and seeing what your thoughts are. I find it a little too disconnected and like too many cooks in the kitchen over a long enough time. I think you always end up getting
I
that.
see.
So it's a little bit
Right.
like you can't really get a what is a definitive Warhammer story. I'm not really sure, and I'm talking
The too
40K as
many
opposed to
cooks in
fantasy.
the kitchen is like the truism of everything released, probably.
Well, probably, yeah. So we do have a funny question that I've selected here since we were talking about it so much earlier in the show. So Myrian asks, "How does the No Frauds Club go about world building?" So, well,
Are you sure we want to answer that? Because we already went
I know, yeah.
about
It's
it.
like I
So
think.
maybe we choose the other question that he prepared.
Yes, I suppose so. Yeah, he did offer two separate ones. So let me go fetch that one here. Yeah, Myrian's gotten into this shtick lately where he asks two questions and lets you pick which one you want. So his second question is: do you think it possible in your future works that an AI could be made nigh unbeatable by all but the most skilled of players? Would you even regard such a thing as desirable? Well, I'll let you answer this question first, because I'm sure technically speaking, it's probably feasible. But what do you think? I think the more interesting question is: would we
I
want
think
that?
it's gonna be an interesting challenge programming wise. I am currently not sure. I think I will have to level up as a programmer a little bit, and like mathematically speaking, algorithmically
Algorithmically, yeah.
speaking,
Okay.
I'd have to come up with some interesting things because you essentially need to like emulate real intelligence taking decisions, which I think decision making, having intelligent decision making is difficult, and you can make them be gods mechanically,
Yeah.
and that's possible, and obviously then it's unbeatable. But do you want that? Probably not. It not only takes you out of the experience, it also just doesn't feel like they're playing the same game as you are, and it's meh. But if they can be like the most intelligent decision makers, and like you often say, they never get tired, which is an interesting way of balancing them, I guess.
Yeah, if you get
Uh,
locked into a macro game with that kind of thing, that could be really
yeah.
scary, right? Because they'll just never stop, and so
But
they'll always scale it.
obviously, one pet peeve of mine in Cosmonarchy is that they still money cheat, and I think that's awful.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I know it's a necessity for them to ever be competitive, but it is, it subverts the expectations so much for me, and it's like I would be fine with them quote unquote cheating. It's just that they play a different game than you. They have more things more quickly. They play a different strategy game, and you have to
yes,
adjust for that, which is the problem for me. And and yeah, I don't know. I will. I would love to. I would love to make an AI that is so smart that you can beat it, but I don't know if it's true about machine learning and whatever. And I don't know if I'm that interested in that.
okay. So,
What's your take?
well, obviously you would know the technical requirements for it more than I would, although I have spent a long time thinking about it. But I've mostly thought about it from a philosophical standpoint, and I think
Right.
I get a very, I do get an enjoyable sort of reaction when my campaign or tutorial or skirmish AI beats a
Yeah.
player, especially if they're a good player. Like if they get surprised and bamboozled, and then they're like, maybe they were reading chat on their stream, or they were just like, having a lackadaisical time, thinking like, oh yeah, I'll just do this, I'll just do that. and then the AI just slaps him. That's satisfying. That is satisfying. But I also think that when it comes to, like, from a philosophical standpoint, I think engaging and interacting with other humans is always a better goal uh, for somebody to take. Like, we are social creatures at the end of the day, and sure, some people will say, actually, we're not social creatures, or I'm not specifically a social, or whatever. But I feel like that's usually cope. Like, most of the time, yeah, you want to be surrounded by people who you have enough in common with to get along with, and enough friction with to challenge each other. And that tends to be the case. Like, obviously, there can be different people that challenge you versus different people that you
Why is
just get
that
along with.
possible
But
to separate yourself from social interactions? Because like if you at the point you're playing a game, you're using a computer made by someone else. So
sure. And
that's
there's baked
something I
in
would
assumptions
consider.
and all this other stuff that goes into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So
Yeah. So
I think, generally speaking, like, the AI idea is like, I would always want it to be the training system, the launch pad, the sparring partner, practice partner. But
well,
I
what
wouldn't
I
want it to
care
be
more
like, you know,
about
wait, what are you saying?
what I care more about, I guess, is that for campaigns we can really sell the characters using AI.
Sure, yeah.
I think that would be really cool if they actually express themselves as characters using our AI system. That would be cool.
Yeah, I think it would be really rad if we had really robust AI. Don't get me wrong. I just don't know if is the answer the AI should be able to beat any player and should be unbeatable, or even by super skilled guys. Like, do I want, like, Flash, somebody with Flash's Brood War level in our game to still not be able to win versus an AI? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I feel like it, I almost wonder if it wouldn't make a difference anyway. But I also think that um, man's supremacy over machine is actually kind of like the supposed to be the thing. Like, if you think about all the hard games you've ever played, like maybe Hades before the grind loop sets in and you're like, oh shit, this is actually not so good. And maybe those shoot 'em ups, if you're from the arcade background, like, stuff happens and it feels really impossible and difficult to do, and then you realize, wait, it is possible. Like, that revelation of what's possible, or even like
Yeah.
the eureka aha moment that you get from playing The Witness or whatever, is
I
that's
really
that's
have
the key
two
moment.
ideas.
That's the thing that makes it meaningful. If there's
Yeah.
no solution because it's unwinnable, then actually I think that would be the opposite of inspiring and positive. If that makes any sense.
I really like how Electric Underground guy is saying about how difficulty purifies the game design, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like without difficulty you can just do whatever and your decisions have no weight because every decision is a good decision, so no decision is a bad decision, so you may as well not play the game, not engage with it.
Yeah.
And what is really nice about difficulty is that it allows you to improve, allows you to strategize. It exercises your brain, it exercises problem solving, it exercises excellence, mastery. It's just all the good stuff. And the other thing I was thinking of that we should probably discuss at some point, the silly idea that is Neuralink and
Mm.
its implication on RTS. But
Dude,
that's not for today, I don't think.
no, but it would be pretty based.
It
Potentially.
would be
Or it would be
pretty big.
horrifying. I'm not sure which.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that chip in my brain, but
No. Not quite, not quite. Well, that
no,
swiftly
not
moves
no,
us
not
on to,
nowadays.
what'd you say?
Not nowadays with all the
Yeah,
maliciousness of the companies.
I agree. I agree with that. Well, the Shambler asks our final question of the day, and it's not something that's going to get us canceled, which is a surprise. He asks, Veeq has always come off to me as someone more interested in the gameplay side of things than the setting side, so I'm curious, are there any fictional works he has experienced in the past which may have played a role in inspiring him to work on the No Frauds Club's currently planned sci-fi RTSs?
I feel like the preamble to this question I've been answering for like 1 hour now.
Yeah, probably.
But uh, the fictional works I have experienced. Yeah, it's called. I think it's called Inconsummate. That was the first time I've. Yeah, probably. I don't know. I remember liking. when I was a kid, I remember liking StarCraft 2's Wings of Liberty, but mostly for the thematics. Like I
Right.
didn't really care for characters. I didn't even like I think I played the game by skipping cinematics initially or something. I
Right.
also used cheat codes, so
Yeah, yeah, sure.
that's why I just obsessed over the thematics. I very much liked Age of Mythology for the thematics, and I very much liked Age of Empires 3. And I know those are not the most stellars of productions, but I always like the thematics and um, the the fantasy of playing an RTS, of like seeing the battles, seeing the
Right.
events, and they were not ever particularly well written or whatever. And I didn't really care at the time because like I said, I was skipping cinematics. I probably played it in English or something when I still didn't know English.
Sure.
So I probably wouldn't know how to what the thing meant even. So uh I guess I also remember playing Stronghold as a child. Uh but yeah, I think the biggest inspiration to work on Xibalba is just its quality. And uh, yeah, Pr0nogo's previous works were also pretty good. So, and what else? I obviously come from StarCraft background, so that is like I like the races that the game has
Yeah, the
and
thematics of them.
expanding. Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. And expanding it, like taking the premise to its fullest conclusion and actually exploring and being consistent with the rules of the game is really compelling, and that's probably the reason, I guess.
There you go.
And yeah, like I mentioned before, I would also like to write a fantasy setting.
Yeah. I think there's a lot there with fantasy stuff. My work with Pagan kind of flexed that muscle for me, even though there's a
Mm,
lot of tech associated with it in the
right.
setting. There's also a lot of like magic stuff, right? So I feel like I don't know if I would go like medieval fantasy or whatever, where it's like before guns are invented, right? Usually mine is like future fantasy, like sci-fi fantasy hybrid or whatever. But
You can probably do like a fantasy. I wonder if you can marry like gunpowder age with
yeah,
medieval
yeah,
age,
yeah. People have done that before.
because it's just I guess Warcraft 3 does
Yeah, in a
that.
way. True.
Such, but can you make that make logical sense? Is what I'm thinking. I guess with like magic and elementals and mythical creatures, it probably does. I guess you can also make your humans be NCV, so they're just like
Right.
turbo buffed and
Well, also think
blessed
about it like this, right? Like
by the gods.
you've played Cyberpunk, or at least you've seen other people play it a lot because you were talking to me about it back when
Yeah,
it was more
yeah,
modern or more recent.
it's a really bad game.
So imagine the setting of Cyberpunk where you have this like really weird, futuristic, indeed cyberpunk city, uh, where all these people are gathering and they're all like humans. And now imagine like how would you have a fire elemental in that, or how would you have a fucking wood elf mage in that, or whatever. And like I think you can combine the sci-fi and fantasy parts into something that's interesting. But I also think there's an element where maybe the sci-fi distracts from the fantasy parts and then it becomes like kind of a
Mm.
mess.
I
So,
definitely enjoyed Witcher 3 way more than
sure,
Cyberpunk.
yeah.
I think I don't like the setting. It's like weird, and
It's not
like
futuristic
it's
enough.
not the sci-fi I like,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's nice. I don't like punks at all, like cyberpunk or like steampunk or
Yeah.
whatever. Those kind of games always give a weird vibe to me. They're like weird.
I've always felt that they were really weirdly cringe and I could never really explain it, but it was just like, no, this is like way too overly focused on the one thing instead of it
Right.
felt like it was reductive maybe. It's like
Mm.
I mean you're literally reducing it to like does it have steam and gears and stuff? Well, if so, then put it in, and if it not, then get it out.
Yeah.
And it's like what under what
Or just
circumstances?
take an existing concept and add Steam and gears to it.
Right. Well, but also, under what
So
circumstances would you ever invent stuff only for that? Like, I guess the world it doesn't pass muster. Because, like, why would you have that as part of the world? You know? As, like, the only thing in the world, basically. So,
or
I don't
maybe
know. It
they just
doesn't
think
really
Steam
make
is
sense.
based.
I guess. I guess so.
Or
Meanwhile,
there's
they
a
probably
reality
use
where you can.
the Epic Games launcher instead of Steam, obviously.
I
Epic
don't.
Games.
I don't know about Epic. Don't like it.
So, I guess that kind of brings us to the end. Do you have closing words, closing thoughts, Q7?
Um, Shout out to everyone, to Coffee Guys, to Akko, to BTB, to our players,
Hell yeah.
and it's pretty epic. It's blooming. It's good. We are on the right track, which I'm happy about.
I'd say
And
so.
and I just have to remind you to, by the way, to every 12 you see, because this is episode 12. By the way.
That is true. That's as I once said, next episode will be a baker's by the way. And that's all you need to know, because if you guys don't know, a baker's by the way is 13. And that's what's coming up next. So keep that
Yeah.
in mind, and remember to send us your spare threes on coffee. And shout out to Sayan, who was willing to check out our project, and shout out to
Also, shout out to Art of Turtle and
oh yeah,
Herbmon.
yeah, that's right. They're playing now. Urban got
Good
his
people.
brother to play. We got
Just
Sayas
remember,
putting the
if you
words in.
want to try Cosmonarchy, it's just one click
It's
nowadays.
actually just one click, dude. It's epic. So I guess we'll see you on the server. We'll see you in the community, and see you playing some matches. I'll be casting everybody here's games. Everybody listens to this. You guys get a game casted. So pop up them numbers, and we'll
Yeah.
see you guys very soon. GG.
By the way.